สำหรับน้องปอนน้องจิโร่น้องเรย์เองก็มองว่าบอร์ดเกมเนี่ยเรียกว่าเป็นแสงสว่างเป็นจุดไฟให้พวกเขานะคะได้ปลีกตัวจากโทรศัพท์แล้วก็ส่งต่อแรงบันดาลใจให้เพื่อนๆทำให้เขาแบบสนิทกันเองมากขึ้นนะคะก็สำหรับเซสชั่นสุดท้ายในเช้านี้นะคะเป็นเซสชั่นที่เรียกว่าสามารถสร้างแรงบันดาลใจให้ผู้ที่อินเกี่ยวกับการพัฒนาทักษะได้เลยนะคะเป็นการหยิบบอร์ดเกมมาสร้างและพัฒนาทักษะผู้คนมากมายทั่วโลกค่ะสปีกเกอร์ท่านนี้ค่ะจะมาเล่ากรณีศึกษาของ Sky Project ภายใต้หัวข้อ Why are games an effective mode of learning Theoretical Foundations of Game-based Training ซึ่งท่านนี้นะคะเป็นศาสตราจารย์และหัวหน้าโครงการ Sky Project ค่ะจากมหาวิทยาลัยนาโกย่าประเทศญี่ปุ่นค่ะ So it is my great honor to invite Professor Shoko the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Yoko Yamada to the stage. ขอเสียงปรบมือดังๆด้วยค่ะ
Thank you very much for giving this opportunity to me. I'm Shoko Yamada from Nagoya University. And let me introduce myself briefly. I am a professor of Graduate School of International Development, Nagoya University in Japan. And here today, I am with my team members. We call ourselves as Sky Project. Please look at the logo here on the left side top. It represents the abbreviation of Skills and Knowledge for Youth, SKY. So we have been working in Global South, mostly in African countries, to support young people who finished education a bit early, after the secondary school or even before finishing secondary school. But they are working in the industry and needing some skills training. And we introduced board games in training their skills. That is why we are here today. And I have two members there. One is Miss Pimada. She is now working as a research staff of Chulalongkorn University. She just finished PhD from Nagoya University last year. Would you please stand, Pim? Yay! And another staff member of our team is Mr. Emmanuel Estrelado. He is originally from Philippines, and he is now working as assistant professor of Nagoya University for this project. So we are assessing the skills and developing the skills of working people in the Global South. And my specialization is education policy studies, education measurement, and industrial human resource development. Okay. Now, I think you guys are interested in using games, board games, for education purposes. So when we assume that game is better than any other means of education, why do we think that way? Probably we assume that games are more fun. Okay? So when the games are fun, probably students, learners, are going to be more committed to learn, and then self-motivated learning would come up with better results. Let's investigate if that kind of assumption we have will be justified with a theoretical and philosophical background, which we accumulate in the academic field. Okay. So assume that you guys are going to develop the game for education purposes. Then we need to think of two things separately. The left side, I have written the nature of human abilities. We basically do the education programs, training programs to improve the abilities of people. So the right side, the means to improve the targeted abilities. Basically, education is the intervention to improve abilities of people. Okay? So let us consider the left side and right side separately but in the relationship. Okay, left side, mostly what I have written here is the academic findings from the cognitive science and developmental psychology. Okay? So human abilities can be considered in the multiple dimension. Ability to think, ability to know, ability to do, ability to judge, and ability to innovate. And then once, if you have any idea of training program, education program you want to develop, please think of the specific abilities you want to develop through that education program. Please don't just start a program. Please think of the type of skills, abilities you want to develop. Then you can think more specifically about the means to improve the target abilities. You know, we are talking of the games today, but we have to know the comparative advantage of using game in contrast to other education means, such as lecture. Lecture is basically the talk by professors or by teachers. So basically it is driven by the person who wants to convey the knowledge. Okay? Books, you give the books to children, and then children get information from the book. Okay? The game, exercise, this is more the repetition of practices. You do the same thing again and again so that you can get the skills. And research, you can give some project to the students so that the students can do the survey by themselves and learn by themselves. And game is one of these many means to improve the abilities. Now, let us start from the left side, the nature of human abilities. What do we know about human abilities? Well, this is something which, if you are a graduate school student, you may be given something you must know as a basics. Okay? So human ability is considered to have three main domains: cognitive abilities, metacognitive abilities, and non-cognitive abilities. Okay? Cognitive ability here, the small circle, this is basically to represent the knowledge you accumulate in your brain. Reading ability, language abilities, mathematical abilities. These are basically the cognitive abilities here. And then non-cognitive ability there on the top, it's basically your ability to be able to work with other people. You know, socio-emotional ability on the left side, it means you are going to use your knowledge to work in the workplace, communicate with people, and then get the results. And the psychology, it is about the mindset of the learners. You learn better when you are more motivated. You be able to apply the knowledge when you are committed to solve the problems in the real life. So psychology and social-emotional aspect of knowledge, these are very important for you to make changes on the ground. And then metacognitive ability. It is to connect the cognitive and non-cognitive abilities. Having the knowledge in your brain is not enough. You have to be able to let it out to solve the problems in your life. So to combine your knowledge in different parts of your brain and the technical skills in your hand and your social-emotional ability to work with other people, you need to have the metacognitive ability to combine all these different knowledges. And it is said nowadays, this metacognitive and non-cognitive abilities are much more important than cognitive abilities. Because having the knowledge in your brain only doesn't work to make any changes in the real world. So nowadays, I'm sure you will also hear the similar criticism that schools are not producing people who can work effectively in the world of work. So the industry people always criticize the education institutions that, oh, your education is meaningless. That kind of criticism happens because cognitive skills alone does not solve the problem. So now, coming back to your idea of using the game for education purposes, which of these diverse skills are you interested in cultivating through the game-based training? That is something you need to consider. Now, so if you are interested in designing the education programs, I would say that there are 4 stages of designing. First, you need to set the goal, and then you need to, the goal is a very broad things. But the second stage is to think about desired learning outcome. Since it is education program, you are thinking that some aspect of abilities of training education participants would improve some kind of abilities. So then, what kind of abilities do you want to improve as a result of your education program? That is a second step you have to think. Set a goal and then translate it into the desirable learning outcomes. The third is the selection of education method. That is the list of teaching methods I have just mentioned, from the lecture by the teachers, books, exercise, research, and game. Which ones are better suited for, depending on the type of desired learning outcomes. That is the third step. And then the fourth step is evaluation. Please don't just develop the game and be satisfied. It's not the ending. Actually, you have to evaluate whether your intended goal was achieved by your education program. Then after evaluation, you have to be able to improve your education program, or you can, if the outcome of evaluation is positive, you can promote your education program to other people. Okay, so here is an example of the relationship among goals, desired outcomes of learning, and indicators to assess the achievement. First example is about the school education. If you are working for the Thai government Ministry of Education, then you may think that the goal of education program would be to improve the common basic cognitive skills, knowledge of young people in Thailand, young citizens. Then, based on that goal, the desired education outcomes would be to master the contents of curriculum. That is a goal. Then, indicators of assessment will be the good performance in the school test. Okay, that is one example of linking goals, learning outcomes, and evaluation. The second example is very different. Okay, you may want to create a society which share the common values. For example, in a society, you may have a lot of different ethnic minorities. Then you may want to see the culturally sensitive coexistence among them. Then the goal to create a society which share the common values, then the outcome you want to have as a result of education program will be the attitude of learners to respect cultural diversity in the classroom. After attending the training program, after playing the game-based education, you'd want them to have attitude to respect different cultures. Then, if you do the education program like that, then you have to also think of evaluating them, whether they have attained the intended objective or not. You may give the questionnaires to the game participants, or you may observe the behavior of those participants after the education program. The third example is rather what Sky Project, our team, is doing. Our goal, since we are working in the global south countries and with disadvantaged young workers, our absolute goal of the project is to promote economic growth. But economic growth cannot be improved with the game-based education. So the direct objective, the desired outcome of the training participation is higher productivity of workers. Then we are going to evaluate our programs according to the improved mentalities, better sense of commitment to work, or a better idea about productivity. Those are the kind of indicators for assessing whether our training program was effective or not. I am going to share the outcome of our evaluation with a very significant statistical impact of our education program later. Okay, as such, so there are different objective goals and aimed learning outcomes and evaluation in the consistent linkage with each other. Then we have to think of different education methods. So I would say, here you can contrast different education method by having the contrasting arrow. I would say the games are more suited for the type of learning outcomes which require more self-driven type of education. Lecture is more teacher-driven, but game is more self-driven. And also, games are more sensory and physical. What I mean here is that if you just sit in the classroom and listen to the lecture by teachers, you basically use your brain and take note. So you don't use the 5 senses of your body. But when you use a game, it's going to use various different senses of your body. That is more considering the original biological nature of human being. Learning should happen with the 5 senses. In that sense, game is effective because it is sensory and physical. And it is also suited for developing values and attitude. Now I'm looking at this green arrow. Games are good for developing values and attitude. Well, it's of course also good for the cognitive abilities, improving cognitive abilities, but it is particularly good for values. Because during playing the game, players think by themselves. Basically, the players want to win the game. So they strategize themselves to somehow combine their knowledge and trying to manipulate different means, pieces of rules of the games and try to win the game. So that is, and in that process, if you design the training education program using the board games in a way to let them think in a way based on certain values, then you can guide them to develop their own values. So games are suited for the values and attitude formation, which I am going to come back later. And 2 other things, the blue ones and this, the orange one, the dark orange one, these 2 are related. Basically, games can be used for diverse background, population with diverse background. On the same board, you can have adults, you can have children, you can have highly literate person with less literate people. It doesn't matter, if you are in the school classroom, probably you need to have more unanimous population. You need to have five graders, 10th graders. Basically, they have gone through the similar education and then they have the same level of literacy. But in the game, you don't need to worry about it. Rather, mixture of diversity is more interesting. And also the experience is going to be diverse. So the background is diverse and also experience is going to be diverse. Because while you are playing the game, you are the one who strategizes to win the game. So, and then the logic to win the game is all up to you. You decide how to use the game mechanics to win the game. So the experience is diverse depending on your interpretation of the meaning of the game and your personality and your experience and environment. In that sense, you can intentionally create diverse experiences. That is a very beautiful aspect of game-based education. I'll skip these. Too theoretical, so I skipped some slides. Now, so let me jump to another theoretical basis of game-based education, social learning theory. This is psychological theory, social psychology. Okay, it's not so complicated theory. The guy named Bandura said here, I quote, "Humans learn through observation of others' behaviors in the social context and then model their own behavior on these observations." So that's a statement by Bandura, very famous scholar. Okay, so basically the lesson from this statement from the social psychologist is that human beings do not live by themselves, but live in the community, live in the society. So when you learn through the interaction with others. And you learn by observing how other people behave and then interpret it in your own way. For example, in the simple example, a very young child look at their parents, look at their siblings, and then at first they are just looking, observing, but then gradually they will pick up the meaning of the behavior of parents and siblings. So then gradually they start to copy what parents are doing. And then they try to do things according to what they learned from the parents and siblings, but also based on their personalities and understanding of the needs of what they need to do. So that is the social learning theory. Now, how does it relate to the game-based education? Okay. So there are people who try to apply the social learning theory to the behavioral modeling training. Behavioral modeling training is considered as a good application of social learning into the organized training and education programs. So basically, the behavioral modeling training is to make the social learning as a part of the education program. And game is a very good place to do that. So the training based on the social learning theory guide participants to learn new skills, new ways of doing things through observation and participation in a simulated situation. Okay, simulated situation is a key. So, in the real life, you have to experience diverse issues through the direct exposure to the realities. But training is more focused, concise way of letting people experience that kind of things. So that you create the simulated situation intentionally in which the learners can go through those experiences of looking at the models, understanding why they behave that way, copying it, and applying it to your own actions. So that is a behavioral modeling which you can use for education, particularly for cultivating certain behaviors and attitude. Now, so let me conclude my presentation by just sharing with you what we did as a Sky Project. And if you are interested in this approach used by Sky Project, my colleagues are going to give you the workshop, offer the workshop to go guide you step by step in developing the game-based training programs. So we basically use the game-based training to develop the non-cognitive social-emotional skills by participating in the game. And we developed this kind of game because most of the training programs provided for the working young people in the global south have been lecture-based, even though the participants of that kind of training programs are not so highly literate and do not take those lectured contents into their own practices. So there is a discrepancy, the disconnection between what the trainers do and what the trainees can absorb. That's why we use the game-based training approach. And my colleagues are going to explain the details later, so I'm not going into detail, but you can see there are 2 game boxes displayed at the booth, so you're welcome to visit and know more details. So here, let me come back to my ARIA explanation. As I said, when you develop your game-based education program, first you have to set the goals. Then, second, you need to set the desired learning outcomes. Here is 5 pillars of desired learning outcomes we came up after situation analysis of the industry. So my colleagues are going to explain how you can do the situation analysis and how you can come up with the pillars of key learning outcomes. Here we have 5 pillars: occupational health and safety, tidiness and cleanliness, efficiency, quality control, teamwork. These are basically for people working in the industry. Now, so as I said, there are 4 steps of developing and evaluating and improving the game-based education program. Now I explain the goals and learning outcomes, and then the method is game. Then, 4th step is evaluation. So this is what we did as evaluation. We did the experiment, having more than 500 participants. Experiment, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this method of evaluation, but you give the game for half of the 500 population. Half people do not participate in the game. And then, so we compare participants and non-participants. And also we give the skills assessment, ability assessment before the training program and after the training program. So we can compare before and after and between participants and non-participants. That way you can demonstrate the statistical levels of significance of the participation in the game. Now, you can see, well, let me just focus on the right side. If by chance you are interested in the article itself, 3 of us have written the article to give you more details. Anyway, for today's purpose, this right side graphs are enough. Now, there are 6 graphs on the right side. That means that we have estimated the impact of training for 5 domains of desirable learning outcomes, which I mentioned earlier, plus overall performance. So that's why there are 5 plus 1, 6 graphs. And then you can just see, you don't need to go into much details, but you can just see that red bars, all of 6 red bars goes up towards the right side. And the blue bars are just flat. This means that blue bars, those ones who didn't participate in the game, didn't change much before and after the game. But those ones who took part in the game, red lines, improved their abilities in 5 domains plus overall performance. In all 6 areas, they improved the skills. This way, we demonstrated that our game-based training was effective for improving the intended learning outcomes. And also, we identified who'd more benefits than other participants. So we found that people with less years of school education benefits more. So it supports our hypothesis that people who are not good at absorbing the abstract ideas by written text or the lecture may benefit more from game-based, experience-based education. That assumption, hypothesis, was proved. And also, those people working in the big companies tend to benefit more. So we demonstrated the effectiveness, and also we found some better population to be targeted than other population. So the benefit of doing this kind of evaluation is you can improve your own training program, and also you can identify the strengths and weaknesses of your program. Then you can promote your programs to the stakeholders. Okay? For example, if you want to get more funding support, you can explain this data to the funders, new partners, or the parents of those trainees, or the employers in our case. We can show these outcomes so that we can get more support from the stakeholders. Now, so this is the last slide. I just want to conclude that game-based training is effective. And this platform, which TK Park is trying to develop, is an excellent platform for us to develop the community to promote the game-based education. It is good for behavioral modeling. It is good particularly for developing the values and attitude. But at the same time, don't be satisfied with developing the game only. Game alone doesn't have much education purposes. You have to do some previous explanation, synthesis, discussion session, so that the experiences in the game is going to be rehearsed and retained in the mind of the learners so that they can apply it in their real life. So games are not enough to retain the learning from experience. Guided reflection and explicit linking of the game experience with real-life situation is necessary. So that's the conclusion of my presentation, and we are very happy to discuss more details and share our learnings. You know, these are particularly the article I mentioned in the presentation. Emmanuel, Pim, and myself have written the paper in 2023. And yeah, also if you are interested in our project, please visit our website or come to our booth outside of this room. Thank you very much.
ขอเสียงปรบมือให้ Professor Shoko Yamada ด้วยนะคะ We sincerely thanks Professor Shoko Yamada for her valuable, insightful talk ค่ะก็ศาสตราจารย์โชโกะนะคะมาเล่าตั้งแต่กระบวนการค่ะตั้งแต่ต้นจนจบนะคะของการนำบอร์ดเกมมาใช้ในการพัฒนาทักษะค่ะไม่ว่าจะเป็นมุมมองแล้วก็เหตุผลที่เลือกใช้บอร์ดเกมรวมถึงความแตกต่างที่เหมือนกันระหว่างความสามารถของมนุษย์และเครื่องมือในการพัฒนาทักษะของมนุษย์นะคะก็ตอนนี้นะคะพวกเราได้รับฟังศักยภาพของบอร์ดเกมค่ะในฐานะเครื่องมือด้านการเปลี่ยนแปลงค่ะทั้งหมด3เซสชันเรียบร้อยแล้วนะคะขอเสียงปรบมือให้สปีกเกอร์ทั้ง3เซสชันอีกรอบนึงค่ะมานะคะขอเรียนเชิญค่ะ Professor Shoko Yamada ค่ะขึ้นมารับมอบของที่ระลึกอีกท่านหนึ่งค่ะขอเรียนเชิญค่ะขอเสียงปรบมือด้วยค่ะค่ะเซสชันนี้เราก็ได้เห็นกระบวนการตั้งแต่เริ่มนะคะจนจบของการนำบอร์ดเกมมาใช้นะคะค่ะและถัดมานะคะเดี๋ยวเราจะขอถ่ายรูปกันอีก2ช็อตค่ะเป็น ถ่ายรูปรวมระหว่างสปีก